Now is the time. If you have questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat. We've gotten a couple, so I'll start with those. But anybody who has additional questions, please feel free to drop them in. The first question we got was for Cody, which is about the maturity of the technology that you're developing. What sort of uncertainty do you have in the numbers that you showed for potential impact or potential cost of the cement?
Hi, we are somewhere between technology ready level 3 and 4. If you're familiar with that, we've done proof of concept work, and we're working on designing our pilot, which we hope to start construction of sometime in 2021. The numbers for economics that I've shown, so our process uses conventional metallurgy, same sort of technologies that are used in the mining industry. So it's very, very simple to model this process in Aspen. So we've been working with a consultant to model this process in Aspen, where we've got good understanding of how these processes work at scale. And what we did is we took our CapEx numbers and we doubled them, and then we constrained ourselves and said we can only sell a quarter of the products that we make. And those are the economic numbers that I presented, because I know that my numbers are wrong. So in order to try to be conservative, that's what we present, to try to not be wrong. So happy to follow up with more detail on that. Hopefully our economics are somewhat better than what I shared, but we'll see.
Okay. Great. Hannah Marie, do you know if any country has set specific NETS implementation, not only for R&D, but a target linked to their mitigation goals?
Well, at least I'm aware that Sweden has now a very comprehensive strategy towards getting net negative or climate positive, as they say, by 2045. And that has a mitigation pathway, like emission reduction pathway that brings the emissions down to at least 85% down from current levels by 2045, if I remember correctly. I have Swedish colleagues here who can help. And actually, wonderful, Fabian, please do.
Yeah, Fabian, please feel free to jump in, although I don't see you anymore. Are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
But I switched to my phone because I'm on my way home. So basically, what the governmental offices in Sweden made a big inquiry on how to reach the net zero target for 2045. And they were looking at if we reduce CO2 in all feasible sectors, and we still have to counter a certain amount of emissions. And what they've identified is that the Swedish government will probably require not to subsidize, but to procure 3 to 10 million tons of negative emissions by 2045. So that is what they have realized. So that's a goal. And now they appointed the Swedish Energy Agency. And what you also realize, so if they need to procure 3 to 10 million tons by 2045, then they need to start launching the first BECCS project during the 2020s, because we're talking about big infrastructure. So they have appointed the Swedish Energy Agency to look during 2021 how this negative auctioning could be made in practice. So they're going to do this through having a negative auctioning process where corporations like us can bid in to supply negative emissions. But the interesting thing is that the Swedish government could be competing with Bill Gates for buying this. And I think that is opening some really interesting research questions.
Could drive the price.
Or maybe the US government want to buy it from us, or South Africa, or any other. And I think that's what I think is really, really cool right now, that things are moving so fast in that sense. So the market transactions are not taking place, but we see the sort of fundamental demand growing and becoming more and more evident. And that's really cool, I believe.
So I'd like to sort of follow up on that with a sort of further question, which is, we've had various different schemes in place, sort of regionalized schemes for carbon pricing over the last couple of decades. Really, none of them, except for Sweden or Scandinavia, have seen prices rise up for carbon to the point where some of these technologies really are feasible. Do you see that changing as a result of this? I mean, do we need to get to a global carbon market before that actually is valuable?
I don't know actually, but the carbon tax in Sweden is 120 euro per ton.
And that's
So
the
that,
only
of course,
place
is
where
quite
it gets up anywhere near that high. In California, our cap and trade price is less than 20. So you know, there's a big variation there.
So I would say, Neil, even within California, right, our fuel emission standards implicitly have the price at hundreds of dollars of CO2, right? So we actually have quite different incentives in the same state and the same regulatory agencies.
That's, I think, a very valid point, that the implicit carbon prices of some of the policies are very high. And that's something that Fabian was also referring to. So I think because the explicit carbon prices are often only $10 or less, now a bit higher, it's about 30 here in Europe, then it kind of misleads people to think that that's the levels that we're having, but implicitly we're having much higher levels. And as we go towards net zero, we're talking about very, very different marginal costs per ton. And suddenly the expensive net stuff, about $80 per ton, starts to be a price cap. Rather than a really high price, it's actually something that limits the cost, because the closer you go to zero in the emission side, the higher the prices are going to be implicitly, at least, if not explicitly. So in terms of whether we're going to have a global carbon market, I would say no. I would not hold my breath. I've been working with carbon markets for 18 years, and I don't see a convergence. However, there is going to be a fragmented carbon market with more and more implicit or explicit carbon prices, and we're seeing that all the time. I mean, 20% of global emissions are now under some type of carbon price. And if we are going towards the Paris goals of 1.5 degrees, then there is a high commission on carbon pricing that has estimated that the carbon price compatible with 1.5 degrees is $40 to $80 per ton today, and 50 to $100 within 10 years time. So that's the price that is compatible with 1.5 degrees. And with that price, we actually already can start to get to see some nets. So it really, and that price comes if countries start to push their targets towards 1.5 degrees, and not just countries, but also companies. So, and we are seeing a huge change of targets going from minus X% into net zero, net negative, very recently, by big companies, you know, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and so forth, and countries, and even China with the carbon neutrality 2060 announcement. So that, I think, is a indication that the carbon prices are certainly on the rise. But then the question is how quickly they are, and that depends on political decisions on the ambitions of the targets.
Neil, you're muted.
I see that. Reminder: people can post questions in the chat if they have them. Cody, one of the things that I think that stands out a little bit about some of the industrial process emissions is, unlike energy use, and to some extent unlike transportation, firms that make materials that are that embody these process emissions are mobile. And so are there different sets of challenges associated with trying to infiltrate net zero or negative process emissions technologies in the industrial sector as opposed to the energy or transportation sectors?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Neil. I believe that there are, and I believe that there are also different solutions for those different challenges. So certainly companies have a storied history of being able to move abroad and then export and import materials freely. And they also have a storied history of being able to, get around regulation in unforeseen ways. So it's very concerning. We could, imagine in the United States, we put enormous regulations around production of cement and steel, and these industries would then move somewhere else and figure out some way to, potentially self-regulate and then import, or, lots of things that we can't think of. So this is one of the reasons that I think it's so important with industrial emissions to think about processes that are advantageous to these companies, so profitable, as well as zero or negative emissions. And like some of the stuff that we've talked about. There's also challenges just around energy, which are sort of unique. So capital cost is really important in industrial processes. And when you have intermittent energy, that's a big problem if you have high capital costs, because you have capital assets that are sitting around doing nothing, and you have to buy more plants and run them less frequently in order to make the same amount of product. And then finally, we talk a lot about energy being cheap, and indeed, solar and wind electricity are cheap compared to electricity, but compared to burning coal or natural gas just for heat, which is a quarter of industrial emissions, they're still very expensive. So $0.015 per kilowatt hour for wind, which is the lowest price of wind that I'm aware of, is still more than double the price of just lighting coal on fire per unit energy. So I think all of these are regulatory challenges that we need to be clever thinking about our technologies, but also I think Hannah Marie could probably think of some really clever regulations that I can't. So.
Okay, great. So again, if anybody has any questions that they want to ask for the panel, now would be the time. Otherwise, I know we're a little bit beyond when we said we would stop, but we also started a little bit late. So I'm happy to stay here as long as for a few more minutes if folks want to weigh in on anything else. Cody brought up one point that I've been a little bit curious about myself, which is, we are seeing all of these negative emissions technologies emerge and need to scale. And a lot of the question is how well can they scale, and how interdependent are they on the costs of renewable energy? Is it possible that as we push on aggressive carbon and emission reduction pathways through the implementation of renewable energy, that then might actually undercut the deployment of some of these negative emissions technologies that we've talked about? I don't know exactly how those things might intersect in some of the combined models for our future emissions targets. I don't know if anybody has a thought on that.
Well, Neil, since we're going after the shipping industry, I'll say one of the, I think, the sort of straightforward answers to your question, which is that there are, of course, several industries for which it's very hard to imagine how they decarbonize, right? And that they're going to need some sort of way of having somebody else, like Fabian, right, take the CO2 out of the atmosphere for them, that they're going to put in. Long-range shipping, airline industries, these are ones that are brought up all the time, that is going to require us still to have nets of some sort. I think that the issue that cheap power, right, is going to help offset the need for emissions, needs to consider, though, something really important about the climate, right? And that is that it cares about the integral of CO2 emissions, not about the rate that we're currently doing right now. And so all the 400 gigatons that we've done right up to today since 1850 have to come back out if we're going to stay below 1.5 or 2 degrees. And so getting to net zero is great, but our legacy emissions are warming climate. There's 0.5 watt per meter squared of warming associated with CO2 up in the atmosphere already that we have not realized. The glacial interglacial difference in that number of global heating was 4 watts per meter squared. So that 0.5 watt is actually a huge amount of warming that we haven't realized yet that we're going to have to deal with by taking out. And so it's not just about matching rates. You also have to think about the integral.
Great. Or not so great, as the case may be, but
yeah, I don't mean to be depressing, but that's just what's happened.
Good. Okay, well, I think we've been 15 minutes over time, so now is as good a time as any to thank you all for participating, and thank everybody for staying on and listening. It's been a great discussion, and yeah, we feel free to forward additional questions on through the conference, and those of you that are in the United States, have a good rest of your day. Those of you that are in Sweden, have a good evening. Those of you that are in Asia, thank you for staying up really late with us, and I hope you can enjoy a good night's sleep.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
everyone.
inviting me.
Thank
Yes.
Thank you.
thank
very
you,
much.
everyone.
That was
Really
great.
appreciate it, Neil. So Fabian, if you're still there, I saw your comment that it's not a net if all you do is take up current emissions.
Yep.
Are you still there? Yeah, I'm totally with you. I guess I have two comments to that. One is I'll start at some place that knocks out 3% of global straight away. That seems like a good route forward. The second is coupling direct air capture to the cargo ships is actually, I think, going to be where we really are game changing because you don't have to concentrate the CO2 very much from a DAC process before you're undersaturated, and therefore the reaction is running downhill. And so the combination of the cargo ships already moving at 20 knots, and so they generate a bunch of wind that they're currently having to turn fans for, in like carbon engineering, for instance, and that we don't have to go to pure CO2 in order to be able to deal with the output. They do that to sell a product. Means that this coupling of DAC and the cargo ships, I think, is going to be a really interesting true net in the future.
Yeah, so if you couple it to DAC, then I totally agree. I thought for us looking after the diesel or natural gas emissions, if you buy, well, if you have gas ship or heavy fuel oil, maybe is more common on long transport ships. So
yeah, that's exactly the stuff we're going after. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Then I agree. Okay, I actually have to leave and put some pancakes in some small kids, but
Wait a minute. It's dinner time for you. Dinner pancakes, I guess, huh?
yes. So,
Good.
for our 1-year-old and 4-year-old. So thank you very much. I have to.
Thank you, Fabian.
Yes. Bye.
Jess, do you think you can ever find yourself at a spot where you start with a container ship that is full of fuel and empty of cargo, and end with a ship that is empty of fuel and full of cargo that you synthesized on the journey?
Right, we're going to make a bunch of plastics along the way. Is that?
That's right. So you make rubber ducks or plastic ducks as you sail across the ocean.
And then actually we could keep making them and throwing them overboard and use them as current tracers or something.
That's right.
So the oceanographers can stay excited. No, I can't imagine something like that. It is a great idea, but we're not going down that road.
All right,
I can imagine purpose-built ships that are just carrying limestone.
And just going around dumping emissions.
Right. If you couple yourself to DAC, then the cargo just gets in the way, right? Of something that has a different market in mind. Yeah.
What's the? I guess you don't have a clear sense of what the price per ton of CO2 is before it makes sense to just start shipping limestone around and dissolving it in the ocean as a business.
I don't have a good sense. One of the main reasons I don't have a good sense is I don't understand the efficiencies of the coupling to DAC yet, and that'll be key. I have a pretty good sense that $60 a ton number is probably even lower for the shipping industry because you can barge all your limestone in. And so I have a pretty good sense of that number, but I don't of the couple to DAC.
All right. Cool.
Okay.
All right.
I'm
Thank you,
go
Jess.
have pancakes for breakfast.
Yeah. Thank you for waking up and getting on. I assume the cruise went well. I was worried for a minute that maybe you didn't make it back, and that was why you weren't on.
Yeah. Well, the weather was terrific, but I am just existentially exhausted. I went back less than 24 hours ago, and did not sleep very much for the last 8 days. So I'm
all right.
tired.
Well, thank you for joining in.
Yep, very happy to do it. So long. See you later.
Yep. Jerry, thank you very much for having us. I'm glad I finally managed to be able to participate in a conference. All it took was moving it to virtual with a global pandemic going on.
Thank you very much. It's a very, very good panel.
Yeah. Thank you. And I don't know if Kenneth is still on, but he was instrumental in putting everything together. So thank you for looping him in and getting things going.
Yeah. Hopefully next year.
I'm here. Great work, Neil.
Thank you,
really
Kenneth.
Interesting.
Hi, Kenneth.
Hi.
Okay. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm going to also head off and make sure my kids get out to school. So thank you. And Jerry, we'll follow up sometime soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Have a good day.
Yeah. Bye, Kenneth.
Bye-bye.